Hey everyone, welcome back to Digital Foundry. It is the 113th edition of DF Direct Weekly, our weekly show where we discuss the latest gaming and technology news. Not a huge amount of news this week, but certainly a big event in the form of Sony's showcase, the first time it's done one in like a couple of years. So expectations were sky high. We were looking to see the best of the best from their first-party studios. We were looking to see some exciting new games we'd never seen before. And, well, we shall be discussing what we actually saw. And joining me on that, first of all, John Linneman.
That's a great intro, Rich. It really sets the tone for where we're going with this, I think.
and of course, Oliver Mackenzie.
Hey, Rich, how's it going?
Yeah, fantastic. For those wondering where Alex is, I got a message from him yesterday saying his modem was broken. Which raises a question: is there still modulating and demodulating in the age of fiber optic internet? I don't know.
I wish I had fiber optic internet. That would be nice.
Do you have a modem though? And is it fully functional?
It is some sort of DSL modem, and it is functional.
Okay, Sony Showcase. Let's kick off by taking some supporter questions, actually. Hi, DF. Hope you're well. This is from Max. I found the showcase to be quite underwhelming, despite the anticipation leading up to it. I could be wrong, but I found the general consensus online to share the same feelings. Spider-Man 2 was the only title people found exciting. Do you think this is an opportunity for the upcoming Xbox showcase to demonstrate its upcoming titles and whip up some interest? And this one from Zephyr, Sony in trouble? ? Exclamation point. The overall consensus of the showcase is that it was middling at best. Is Sony going to find itself in the same position that Microsoft is in now? What does it say about the current generation if both major platforms are struggling? Wow, this is an interesting example of is perception reality? And the answer is no, not really. These are both juggernaut businesses that are actually doing really well, despite their recent travails or quality of showcases or whatever. But there is an interesting point here, John, in that, well, I've got a list of, I think there's 20 games here that were present in the Sony showcase. And this morning I spent some time revisiting the trailers, and there's a lot of really fantastic stuff there. However, in the wake of the actual reveals that we saw in the actual show, I found it difficult to remember, like, most of these titles. So
yeah,
would you agree with me that this was a presentational issue rather than a content issue?
I think it's a bit of both. I think when you actually look at the individual games shown, there's a lot of great stuff here. But the problem is that it's not necessarily showcase material. The way they showed it is also problematic. Basically, they delivered the type of show that we had previously dinged Microsoft for doing during like the E3 season, where it's just wall-to-wall trailers, lots of CG, lots of trailers not really showing much about the game, all jammed together into this gigantic thing that doesn't really hit with the fans, right? And I really think that as a showcase, rather than like a state of play, something designed to showcase what's coming up, I really feel like they dropped the ball, especially on the first party stuff, where they, it's kind of, I don't want to say, it's borderline absurd to me that the big showpiece title that they had was Insomniac's Spider-Man 2, which looks phenomenal, no doubt, but they are very lucky to have Insomniac, I will say. Insomniac basically, they helped carry the launch, they helped carry that first year, and here they are again with another title. Like, what are the rest of the first party studios doing right now? I mean, I'm sure they're working on stuff and things are difficult right now, but I'm a little bit surprised that we saw nothing from them, which suggests that things are perhaps going slower than we'd like. I mean, I applaud them for not just putting out another CG trailer on, the next Sucker Punch thing or the next Naughty Dog thing and calling it a day, but they did do the CG trailer for some of their other first party partners, I think, right?
Yeah.
So
oh yeah, I thought the presentation, like, there were aspects of it that were impressive to me, like just the sheer breadth and volume and pace of the reveals was like pretty intense. A good and a bad thing, of course. At the time, I actually thought, well, this is an interesting presentation as it was going on. But then I slept on it and I looked back at the titles and I really considered it closely, and I became a lot more A lot more unexcited because there really wasn't much meat to it. Most of the titles, they only got very brief segments of gameplay interspersed, like in the classic very fast motion trailer format, or we only got CG, like with games like Fair Games. We only just got a hint of CG and not really any insight into how the game will actually play. There's a lot of games that have service titles and multiplayer-focused titles, including from, from Bungie and Haven. And
Oliver, you're pouring salt in that wound. Come on, buddy.
Yeah.
Well, the Fair Games thing was interesting because it reminded me very much of the Redfall reveal, where we just got got a CG introduction, which kind of attempts to set the stage of what this game's all about, but you basically emerge none the wiser about what you're actually going to be getting at the end of the
After seeing that trailer, my first thought was like, that is the most Ubisoft trailer that ever Ubisoft. It's like Ubisoft's Redfall reveal trailer. And then I looked it up, and apparently it does involve ex-Ubisoft people, so I was kind of spot on. I mean, it really looks like some sort of Watch Dogs spin-off that's been turned into a big multiplayer game, and then revealed through CG. I have no idea why they thought it was okay to open the show with something like that. It reminded me of when the PS5 reveal happened that one summer, I guess 2020 summer, where they started the entire conference with a GTA 5 trailer.
Right?
Yeah. Where it's just like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah, which didn't actually show footage from PlayStation 5.
From PS4.
Like, why did you open the show with this?
Yeah, that was a bit of an interesting moment, that one. Let's talk about the actual games, though, because there was some amazing stuff in there. And we've got to kick off, first of all, with Insomniac's Marvel's Spider-Man 2. Oliver, you're doing some content specifically about that trailer for us. Mm-hmm. I think they were trying to make a statement of how different it was from the existing two games. Mm-hmm. And, we saw a lot of interesting new stuff there, right?
Yeah, I thought it's definitely like a very fast-paced and gameplay-focused trailer, which is what really made it stand out relative to the other trailers. Like, you had a good 10 minutes of very fast-paced gameplay. And as far as I can tell, the key gameplay changes will be the introduction of kind of that Venom or symbiote suit to Peter Parker's Spider-Man, and then also fast swapping between the two protagonists, so between Peter Parker and Miles Morales. And then also they've completely overhauled and expanded the city. You have access to Queens and Staten Island and different areas in New York. Clearly the production values are really intense. It's Insomniac, so it's probably going to come out very polished and with lots of interesting modes, and I'm sure it's going to be a great game. From a visual perspective, the results are a bit more mixed. I've done a lot of comparisons between Spider-Man 2 and the other Spider-Man titles, and it is clear that they have revised most of the building assets in the game. So they've gone through, replaced the textures, added new geometry. Those initial buildings in those two games were very limited, I think mostly because of the PlayStation 4's hard drive. They had a very difficult time streaming in those assets. That's one of the bigger changes. And then also the fast swapping, I'm sure, is only possible because of the PlayStation 5. But outside of those changes, there's not a whole lot technically that really differentiates this from, say, Miles Morales at launch, right?
Interesting. John, would you concur with that?
I would say I need to look more closely at it. You've studied it more, but I will say that it does have some key improvements to the visuals. For instance, in Miles Morales and Spider-Man Remastered, they did not apply ray trace reflections to bodies of water, which made it look very awkward when you move around there, right? And this had an entire segment dedicated to, basically swinging and flying across the water, right? And they actually do now have proper ray trace reflections with the diffuse reflections from the buildings. Everything looks great now on the water. If that were still SSR, you'd just have like tons of disocclusion artifacts and lots of issues there, and that was not present. As for, beyond that though, I feel like this is one of those things where I need to look even closer, and it's something that's going to be difficult to gauge from a YouTube video, because even the 4K feed, if you stop it and any busy sequence, it's just macro blocking heck. It's completely packed full of macro blocking, blur, artifacts. It looks very bad, and that's just a bitrate issue. So I suspect when we actually see the proper game running, it will appear much more detailed, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Well, I thought it was a really interesting and spectacular presentation, to be honest. I mean, the reason it was so good is that you saw so much, and it was, consistent, contiguous, action. which was basically lacking in, well, I'm looking at the list here, practically everything else. And this is kind of like what Sony used to do so well. You got these fantastic slices of gameplay. You really saw what those first party games were going to be doing. They lingered. They let you enjoy the moment, right? They let you enjoy the essence of what those games are about. I mean, the classic one I think would be the Marvel Spider-Man sequence with they took that entire set piece of the skyscraper.
Oh yeah,
which was basically that's how it that's what you got in the final game, bar some graphical changes, and that really was just a moment, an E3 moment, and similar with this one, right? And I was really interested to see what they're doing with the symbiote suit. Because, basically with that suit, they've done a lot of retconning over the years as to what it is and, what it does. And they've kind of integrated that into the origin. I mean, back in the beginning, the symbiote suit was just a black costume until they decided it was actually an alien life form that was going to be taking over Peter Parker. So you didn't actually see any of the stuff that he's doing in this gameplay that in the original comics. It's only when he became Venom that you saw all of this stuff that is actually happening to Peter Parker now. So it's quite an interesting new spin on the whole symbiote suit thing. All I can say is I really want to see more. And I think what Insomniac are the masters of with Spider-Man is they can produce blockbuster set piece sequences that are the match of the movies or better, right? That's what they're specializing in game. And it looks absolutely astonishing to actually see all of this play out, and at the same time to make it feel as though you are part of the action as opposed to just like a bystander.
Yeah.
So what can I say? I'm loving what they're doing here. I'm really looking forward to seeing more.
This was honestly the only title I think that had that same energy as the classic Sony press conferences, though. You mentioned the prior Spider-Man demo, but stuff like God of War 2018 or Ghost of Tsushima or even, The Last of Us Part 2. Like, I was at some of those conferences when they showed them. I mean, I remember with Tsushima, they actually walked us through this whole Japanese garden kind of set piece in real life with all like the sound and music from the game playing and like, flower petals in the air, things like that. And you go into this theater with this gigantic mega ultra wide screen, and it just, you have all the grass blowing on screen, and then they begin the trailer, and it's this nice long gameplay sequence. And they were so good at that type of presentation, and that's what the Insomniac demo here is, but what they did for nothing else.
Yeah.
And
well, that's the point, right? I mean, I've got here on the docket, it's called the Sony Showcase. Sony basically didn't really show up, which is kind of
bizarre. That's what it feels like, yeah.
Yeah. It reminded me a lot of the Uncharted 4, not the reveal trailer, but the chase trailer in Madagascar, I think. It has that same kind of energy, that same really fast pace, that same like seat of your pants gameplay, and that same chase through water and through different environments. And I thought that was such a great sequence, and this seems like even more impressive, and the scale is super great. And I love how they put cranes over the water all around New York City to allow Spider-Man to swing from them. I thought that was really cool. Very pleased with that.
I think one thing, in mitigation, the thing to point out is that there is no E3 anymore, right? So the requirement to produce vertical slice demos lessens. And
that's true.
That is the cost of making those demos in terms of, production resource and whatnot is far more than we can possibly appreciate. It impacts the studio so dramatically. So the concept that, if you're not releasing anything this year, why should you rush a certain part of the game into a demo state? It probably wouldn't be fair on the developer, but at the same time, this was supposed to be a Sony showcase, right?
That is tricky. You're right. The cost of developing these demos is so high, and it's probably not really worth it anymore. But still, it's been 2 years since we had a showcase, and I feel like they really gave us no indication of where they're going next. And we're already 3 years into this console generation, right? Mm-hmm. And it feels like it's barely started.
Let's move on to another game which you've highlighted, John, as number 2 on our list of interest, Phantom Blade Zero. This did look really, really impressive. right?
Yeah, this was actually one of the other games that really caught my attention. I think it's one of the best things they showed. First of all, it is an Unreal Engine 5 game, which we're starting to see more of those. It wasn't the only Unreal Engine 5 game shown at the showcase, but it's one of the few. And it's got a very nice, dark aesthetic that kind of reminds me a little bit of Bloodborne, actually. And it seems to be a fast action, maybe Ninja Gaiden-ish kind of game, with just a really cool vibe. And unlike a lot of the trailers, this seems to have all been real-time stuff. They showed a lot of like gameplay clips within the trailer, even though it is still a trailer. I think it's legit as well, because you can see that the frame rate was rather unstable during the trailer, targeting 60 but not stable, which is a good sign that what we're seeing is actually a real thing. It doesn't seem to be taking full advantage of Lumen necessarily. Like the lighting, like Alex and I were talking about this, the lighting feels, it's fine, but there's still a lot of light leak in the traditional rasterized issues that you'd see. But I would venture a guess that they are putting nanite to use in this one, given the high density of the geometry. There's just a lot going on in every scene. And I also love the animation work. Just watching those battles play out, it kind of reminds me of some old school Japanese style action games. So, you know, again, there's still a lot we don't know about this title, but this is definitely high on the list of games that genuinely got me excited in the showcase.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think it's a bit of a shame that, we did get a fair slice of airtime, like, 3 or 4 minutes.
Yeah, it was a long trailer compared to many of those games.
But I think there is kind of like a sort of less is more thing where I'd have liked to have seen one lingering gameplay segment rather than these fast cuts.
Yeah, I can appreciate that as well.
Oliver, thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I thought it looked really interesting. And like John said, there's a ton of geometry in the environment. That's the main visual standout to me. I did notice the light leak issues as well, especially in the interior spaces, which didn't look quite as good. But it's also apparently a console exclusive, so it's on PS5 and PC. So that's interesting. I'm excited to see more for sure.
Actually, an interesting thing this raises, though, regarding the performance of Unreal Engine 5 is that if this is indeed using nanite but not Lumen, it suggests a potential path forward for developers that are aiming for a 60 FPS experience and maybe struggling to get both going. Like, we know it's feasible with software Lumen, as we've seen in Fortnite, but that's from Epic, and it's based on Fortnite. I feel like, from what I've heard, speaking with developers working with Unreal Engine 5, hitting 60 frames per second with Lumen and nanite running is extremely challenging right now. That's not to say it can't be done, but I think it is tough. So I suspect that's why we're not seeing it here.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Yeah, that was a really interesting presentation, and the concept that you could see Lumen not used and nanite used is interesting to me as well. I wonder how many other titles will be like that. We did actually also see some action from Immortals of Avium, which is due imminently. Mm-hmm. That was Unreal Engine 5.
It is.
Trailer seemed to be 60 frames per second.
With drops.
With drops, yeah. So I'm going to be really curious to see how the console version of that actually materializes. In terms of disclosure, there was a thing at the beginning which basically said this is running on PS5 unless we tell you otherwise. But I don't know. There seemed to be a lot of stuff that seemed to be CG that wasn't transparently disclosed, but I don't know. That's the whole thing.
Right? That's the thing, is like, usually Sony's very good about this. Right? We've dinged Xbox for this in the past for not being completely clear and transparent, but now Sony's doing exactly the same thing, and that's not good. It's a step back.
I think it was more the case that they had a blanket disclosure at the beginning, but then it kind of left ambiguity over some of the content we were seeing. So I do think they need to go back to their prior thing, which is every single trailer there's a caption that tells you what you're seeing.
And the prior showcases, or I guess state of plays, they would actually vary that caption based on the footage. You'd actually see trailers with multiple captions saying this part's CG, this part's in game, this part, you know what I mean? It's like that was extremely forward looking, and that's what we want to see, but we didn't really get that here.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the next game. Oliver, the Metal Gear Solid 3 remaster. Thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think you mean Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater. It's
yeah. Okay.
Or as the internet is speaking about Metal Gear Solid Triangle.
Yeah. I think we knew this one was coming. Unfortunately, it's just a teaser. It does look very appealing, but it is maybe game engine footage, but who knows, right? It's not representative of the game.
They shared some screenshots afterward, I guess.
The screenshots are, they do tell you more. The game does seem to have like a ton of foliage density, lots of geodensity. It's not totally clear what engine it's running on. Could it be Fox potentially or Unreal? It's not totally clear to me.
Same.
It's not totally clear to me either.
Yeah.
I'm still intrigued by that pachinko machine in Japan that has a bunch of Metal Gear 3, Metal Gear Solid 3 content.
Oh, the Fox Engine cinematics.
Which were running on the Fox Engine. And I did hear ages ago that there was going to be Fox Engine remaster of Metal Gear Solid 3, but as to whether this is actually it, who knows?
It would be interesting if that was just like a teaser, like a proof of concept for doing this, right? Or if there's some.
Well, the amount of effort it would have required to create those cinematics is not, insignificant.
Correct. So the thing about this trailer that bums me out is that they went for this sort of pre-rendered thing when under Kojima, the series was known very specifically for showcasing real-time graphics at their absolute best, right? The Metal Gear Solid 2 trailer, of course, springs to mind as the first example of this, where it blew everyone away with that initial showcase. And I don't expect necessarily that same level of prestige, given that this is a remake, but, it's a long way away from where the series used to be in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. They also revealed that the original trilogy is going to receive basically remasters, I think, put together in a pack. Obviously, they've got the Bluepoint work from Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3 to base those games from, but it looks as though the first one is going to be like an all-new endeavor, so I'm quite interested to see what they've come up with there.
Indeed, I agree. Yeah. Although, if I'm to be cynical, I wouldn't be surprised if it's just PlayStation emulation.
That would be a bit rough.
I hope not, but...
Well, a PC version exists, right?
Yeah, but the PC version sucks.
Yeah.
Have you ever played it?
Well, I remember it having 24 FPS cutscenes.
Well, that PC version of Metal Gear Solid 1 was missing so many visual effects from PlayStation. All the pseudo post-processing things that they could do on the PlayStation were gone. All the motion blur and the fake depth of field effects, that was just out of the game. So it kind of made it look a lot worse.
Okay, fair enough. Let's move on to the next game. And this one is quite interesting, John, because it's Assassin's Creed. And in a shock twist, you're actually interested in it.
Yeah, so this is one of the few open world series I had enjoyed in some prior instances. And I always thought it had a lot of potential. But then after a certain point, they decided to essentially clone The Witcher 3, but do what I would consider not a great job. Although Assassin's Creed Odyssey is probably the best attempt at it, and that seems to be very well made, but I really don't like Valhalla, and Origins I thought was pretty boring. This, though, seems to be a returned form. Like, this looks like a classic Assassin's Creed game. I'll be curious to see where they take it, what they do with it. I think it visually looks rather striking. The level of detail and the distance is handled very well, but I would say when I look at the visuals here, as nice as they look, it doesn't feel like that far away from Assassin's Creed Unity. Still, like Unity still has the look with its baked GI. But of course that has pretty major LOD issues given the platforms it was targeting. But, showing this at 60 frames per second with very nice looking visuals that are reminiscent of the original Assassin's Creed, and hearing rumors that it's a shorter, smaller, tighter kind of game, this could be the kind of thing that the series really needed at this point. And I hope that it's worth playing. We'll see. I at least have some hope at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was really interesting, and I loved those vista shots of the city. It did seem to be a bit of a murderous rampage. which isn't what I typically associate with Assassin's Creed, but I'm going to put that down to the trailer format and wanting to make an impact there. You just don't turn your back on the stealth elements that kind of define the whole series, really. Oliver, anything to add to that?
Yeah, they did say that it's like a 15 to 20 hour adventure, I think, in some of the press materials, and they did describe it as a smaller, more linear Assassin's Creed title that's more like the first game, which was, totally different. Those early Assassin's Creed titles, totally different from the recent turn the series has made. My only thought is that they are describing it as like a smaller and different kind of Assassin's Creed that was originally planned, I think, as the DLC for Valhalla, which to me sort of indicates maybe this isn't like the future of the series, but a return to form before they go back to, maybe more RPG focused entries. So I hope that's not the case, but it looks fantastic. It's very cross-gen, but I think the visuals are terrific. Shown off at a stable 60, I'm sure they'll probably hit it, and it looks really good.
Mm-hmm. This looks really interesting, and I'm going to say it one more time, every time we do an Assassin's Creed Unity video, we get monster views. This game is the epitome of unfulfilled potential, right? Because obviously it launched in a really desperate state. There was a lot of issues with performance, but the ambition of the game was staggering. It still holds up today. There are elements that don't hold up, but this is prime remaster territory. Get a remaster out there that actually leverages the capabilities of the new machines, sort out things like the loading issues and whatnot, modernize it for PC. The code base exists. They did a Stadia port of the original version, for God's sake. So
that's true.
There's, this would be the ultimate redemption story for Assassin's Creed. I would love to see that. I'm sure it would do phenomenally well. But in the meantime, Mirage, certainly looks promising, right?
Indeed.
Next up on the list for comment, Ghost Runner 2. Now, this was a really fantastic Unreal Engine 4 game back in the day, the first one. So it's really interesting to see a sequel so quickly. Oliver, thoughts on this one?
Yeah. Well, the first Ghost Runner has a special place in my heart because it's the first video I did.
That's right.
Back in the day. But yeah, it looks very cool. Looks quite similar to the first game, except they described it as having a more open focus, not open world, but more open focus, and it takes place in more areas than just the Tower of Dharma, which I think was the only location in the first game. It looks a bit more varied. They have that motorcycle in there, which actually apparently that's going to play into the gameplay. Like you're going to have motorcycle gameplay in more open areas, which sounds cool. And it looks a bit more combat focused, although maybe that's just the nature of these trailers, like you said. They have to be very flashy and combat focused. So it looks cool. It's coming out pretty soon, I think later this year. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with it. And it looks like it's current gen only, which is nice to see as well.
Wow. Did you play the first one, John?
Of course, yeah. I love the original. It's always kind of like a Ninja Assassin Mirror's Edge, I thought, where it's just focused on quick first-person platforming and chaining together these like cool moves while taking out enemies and avoiding death. And it had a really nice sort of vibe to it. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I'm really liking the addition of the motorcycle stuff and just the kind of like expanded world that they seem to be going for this time. So I will definitely be keeping an eye out for this. And it was a very pleasant surprise, shall we say.
You've also marked down the Plucky Squire for...
there's not that much to say about it because we've seen this before, but I just wanted to highlight it again as I thought this was one of the most interesting looking games shown. And I thought that when they first showed it as well. It's just a gorgeous game that seems to be sort of moving in and out seamlessly between 3D platforming and 2D platforming and exploration. It's like this strange hybrid kind of thing. And the visuals are just unbelievably nice looking.
Yeah.
This looks like the type of game that would rank high on a list that I might do, if you know what I mean. It's right up my alley.
A list of good things.
A list of good things, we'll say.
Fundamentally. So those are the main titles that we sort of singled out for comment there. But there is some other stuff I think is worthy of mention. Teardown, for example. Alex covered this on PC back in the day. And, we were describing it at the time as an actual next-gen thing, simply in terms of physics. I think that's a really interesting thing to point out, is that certainly with cross-gen, there's still the lingering issues of the last generation CPUs just not being fit for purpose, and therefore we saw sort of a reduction in physics fidelity. Teardown is like the antithesis of that. It just looks, it's total carnage, really. But at the same time, it was also extremely taxing to run on the hardware of the time. So I've got to doff my cap to the developer for getting this running in an acceptable state, even on the current gen consoles, I think. So yeah, that's
I agree.
An interesting one.
I really love this game, having played this on the PC as well. This idea of going through all these different heists and being given the freedom to sort of figure it out, and the voxelized look that they're going for. When you destroy things, there's actual physics properties being calculated so that stuff falls and tumbles and blows apart realistically as you'd expect. And that is just thrilling and awesome. And it's the type of stuff we don't see very often these days, I feel. And I was pleasantly surprised to see this coming to the consoles. So It's a nice announcement.
Yeah. Seems to be running with an unlocked frame rate, which
we'll see.
It'll be interesting to see how it actually pans out on the consoles there in performance terms. I'm just looking at the list of games, John, I compiled the list and you highlighted the ones for discussion, and I'm quite amused to see that you didn't highlight the most viewed trailer from the entire showcase, which is Bungie's Marathon.
Yeah,
and it is essentially the case that Marathon is a game where users of a certain age have got a lot of affection for it, but it has been co-opted into an extraction shooter format, which I think is safe to say doesn't sit well with you.
Okay, so I don't actually necessarily hate that genre like some things, and I actually did have some fun with Rainbow Six Siege, right? And I'm sure that with Bungie's skill, they'll be able to create a solid game here, no doubt. And I would even say, despite my distaste for CG trailers, this was probably the first CG trailer in like years where the actual trailer itself is really visually interesting. Like it's a piece of art on its own, and I do like that aspect of it. But so Bungie, maybe the Bungie of old, I don't know who's still there that even has experience. Bungie created, in my view, some of the best and most enjoyable single player shooters ever made. I think their work on Halo and even Marathon 1, 2, and Infinity is unbelievable. They did such a good job on that front. They were truly the masters of making like memorable, replayable campaigns, like just so good. I'm such a huge fan of that. And you can really feel it with Halos once Bungie left that behind, right? Like 343 never got close. Like, I don't dislike 343's work. I think they made good games, but it's just not that Bungie level. And the idea of them revisiting Marathon is something I have dreamt of for years. I did play those original games back on the Mac even. Well, at least the original on my friend's power computing Mac clone, which was rather interesting. But then, Marathon 2 is on the PC as well. And I think Infinity has a PC version, and they're available now. They're very, very well made. And so I'm sad to see that this reboot is essentially just an extraction shooter. And that hurts worse when you consider that, like, you look at Halo, right? Halo was known for its single player. Of course, it's amazing for that, but it was also equally known for its multiplayer. And I'm starting to wonder, with the complexity of development these days, have developers lost the capabilities of building a package that includes both? Like Call of Duty still does it, but it kind of feels like a lot of these companies are just like, well, the demands of doing multiplayer are so high, we have to commit all resources to making that work, and there's just not room to do an excellent single player portion. They don't even need to be the same. Like in Halo, the core gameplay is the same, but they were very different modes, very different things. Absolutely. And together it made such a good package. You play that campaign, you do it again in co-op, you jump into the multiplayer. I actually loved Halo multiplayer, and I don't usually, you know how I feel about modern multiplayer. I loved Halo in multiplayer. And I'm just sad that Bungie is essentially given that heritage up, and they're just like, nope, they're just going to do this. So
yeah, I suspect it's return on investment, and also Sony's aspirations for dramatically increasing its live service output,
which is
also none of us are particular
depressing.
fans of that.
Actually, I've said this before, but I think live service games it's such a risky business, and I'm surprised that so many companies are jumping in, especially with multiple service games, because it's like serious gambling, right? you stand to make a ton of money with a live service game if it's successful. But if it's not, you've wasted the lives of so many people for so many years. All that time building the game, all the time supporting the game, and then it goes offline and it's lost forever. Right? It's such a waste of talent, time, resources. I just can't believe like games as a service is a huge waste and a bad thing for the industry, I think.
Fair enough.
Yeah. It also feels like a weird match for Sony, because in the past, Sony has really been about these big cinematic games that drive people to the platform, instead of like Marathon, which is cross-platform extraction shooter game as a service thing, which doesn't, I don't know, that really draws people to PlayStation, right? Just
well, it does at least show, Oliver, that they're kind of staying true to their promise of keeping Bungie somewhat independent, right?
Yeah,
they're still allowing them to target multiple platforms and let their games thrive across there, which is a good sign, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fair enough. Before we move on to a sort of adjacent topic from the showcase, quick question here from Lieutenant Frank Trebin, on secondment from Police Squad, no doubt. With the announcement of the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1, do you think we will see Metal Gear Solid 4 finally released from PS3 Purgatory in future volumes? Interesting question, right, John? I'd say the answer's no, but what do you think?
It's difficult to say. I mean, maybe with this potential for a volume 2, they'll finally revisit it. We just don't know. There's not enough insight on this to say. And who knows what the state of that source code is in, whether, like, how much work it would take to actually convert that, like, what's even left.
It's just the nature of the source material.
Exactly.
The PlayStation 3 was such an alien console. And, you know, in the case of this Volume 1, they've got the Bluepoint code base to rely on, which is basically solid gold. There's nothing like that for Metal Gear Solid 4, which is a bit of a shame.
I agree.
Okay.
Well, Rich, I do want to do one more comment on the show before we wrap up this part of the discussion. And it's PSVR 2. I think that's worth mentioning because I felt like this showcase was kind of a do or die moment for it. Although based on their sales projections, perhaps it's not actually that. But in terms of the general perception of the platform, I feel like it fell short. I think Resident Evil 4 VR looks great, but it's an add-on to an existing game. And just the rest, they didn't show anything that would get you really excited about PSVR 2. Like Team Asobi, I guess, the Astrobot guys. I'd imagine they're working on something for that. Maybe, I'm sure it's not ready to show then, but the fact that we haven't seen it and it's been 3 years since Astro's Playroom, it's starting to make you wonder about where they're going with this. And obviously at this point, you know, we'd been hoping for a Half-Life Alyx announcement. I'm starting to think it won't happen. And, you know, I can understand Valve probably doesn't have much interest in that occurring either. But I don't know. I think that it felt like the PSVR section was relegated to this sort of like a late midpoint of the show, and just kind of they tossed a few games in there and then it was back to the regular stuff.
Yeah.
And that's a bummer.
What do you make of this, Oliver? Because, there is a distinct lack of momentum with PlayStation VR 2 at the moment. We had what I thought was actually quite a strong launch, and the momentum has just kind of flagged.
Yeah.
I guess we saw Beat Saber, which is going to make a lot of people very happy, but it's not, going to make you rush out and buy PlayStation VR 2, is it?
I mean, really from this showcase, we had like 4 titles, right? So RE4 VR, Crossfire spinoff, and Arizona Sunshine 2. And like the Crossfire spinoff and Arizona Sunshine are kind of like, they're just not the super big investments that I think we'd like to see in the VR platform. RE4 VR, it's cool they're doing another full game conversion of a Resident Evil game. We've seen that before, obviously. I'm sure it will be pretty good. I mean, it's interesting at least. And Beat Saber has been ported to every VR platform under the sun, so that's not a super big surprise. I would have loved to have seen just 1 or 2 more full-fledged VR efforts from Sony that really do stand out here, and I'm still waiting for like the shoe to drop on that stuff, because it does feel like we're overdue for just like one more like really exciting VR title to be announced.
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, the question is still, why does PSVR 2 exist? Why should we be excited about it? Why should I go out and buy one? these are all pertinent questions for a platform that has yet to establish itself. But we got no real answers there whatsoever. It was like, it's the concept of the killer app is still huge for a nascent platform. We just didn't really see anything.
And the hardware is so good too.
Yeah,
That's
a real shame. Yeah. Okay, well, we are now going to move on to the showcase adjacent
adjacent topics.
First of all, is about Remedy Entertainment's Alan Wake 2, and something which I found quite interesting before we get to the meat and drink of the discussion is that, Thomas Pua from Remedy basically tweeted directly after the trailer came out to say, hey guys, this was actually running on PlayStation 5. And it's telling to me that he had to do that, because if you're sort of in a mixture of 20 titles, including CG trailers, how do you differentiate yourself? How do you actually show that you've put the work in? And, the game looked phenomenal. It looked astonishing. It's going to be a really, really great game. And I honestly think that the format of the showcase wasn't conducive to showing off how good this game is going to look when it's surrounded by stuff that is essentially made up, But the thing that upset you, John, is the idea that it is not going to get a physical release. And reasons cited for that were that it would need to be a 2-disc release. They wouldn't be able to hit the price points that they're looking for, which are all, fair enough comments, right? But it is a shame that we're not going to be getting a physical release for this, certainly not in the short term.
Yeah, I mean, I've said a lot about this online, so don't need to get too deep into it, but it's definitely disappointing. And it's something I'm surprised that they decided to do, given their history. I mean, even Alan Wake Remastered and Control got specific versions for the new consoles released, right? Yeah. On disc. And THQ Nordic publicly came out and were like, hey guys, we'll do it for you. Basically, which was funny. They're like, we did the disc for the Alan Wake or whatever. We'll do it again for this game if you want. So
maybe things will happen then.
I have some hope that things might happen, especially after the backlash, and we'll see what happens there. The disc thing though is interesting, and this also got me thinking about the issues with producing disc-based games. Like, let's say you're doing this is a multi-platform game, right? This is coming to Xbox and PlayStation as well as PC. Traditionally, when you do a boxed retail game, you release it for both platforms. Now, the problem on Xbox is that they only support 50 gigabyte discs. So, let's say it's over 100 gigs. On PS5, you could do a 2-disc release, which is not something we see that often already, but it is possible. But on Xbox, now you start to look at like 3 to 4 discs, maybe, which one, I don't think they build cases that can support that necessarily. And 2, given Microsoft's focus on digital and the Xbox Series S, like they probably think like, well, do we even do this at all? And then if we don't do it on Xbox, but do it on PlayStation, does that create an issue? Like, those are the types of questions I'm wondering about in terms of development consideration for these releases. I mean, I guess on Xbox, they could just do the Xbox thing, which is to just put a disc that's incomplete in the box and you download, which Microsoft themselves does often. But still, it's a tricky situation. And I just hope for this case, given the history and what I presume will be a very quality experience, given that history, that we do get to an actual own it on disc. But we'll see. We'll see.
Oliver, what are your thoughts on the actual trailer that we saw? Because it did look spectacular, right?
Oh yeah, I thought it looked really terrific. They're obviously using their Northlight technology. The lighting was really impressive. Character rendering looked terrific, like Alan Wake in particular. Just blew me away. And Sam as well from Remedy looked great in that trailer as well. And
oh yeah, that was cool.
Yeah. And we just saw like short snippets of gameplay, but I thought it looked really interesting. You still have the flashlight. It looks reminiscent of the first game where you have that flashlight and then the one-handed weapon. I'm sure they'll switch around it a lot. But they've got 2 protagonists, and it sounds like you have 2 separate campaigns to play through, which is interesting as well. I'm sure they're going to do some cool stuff with the plot. I'd love to see more. That's my only complaint. I'd love to see more or extended gameplay or something, but but it was really good.
I think they're doing something for Jeff Con. Some of them
Jeff Con, yeah. Did anyone else feel that Alan Wake in this game looks much more like John Wick at this point?
Yes.
Which I'm okay with that.
Quick question here from Ambertukum Salabat, and as usual, apologies on pronunciations. But his question, or her question, what do you think Alan Wake 2 not having a physical release means for physical copies in the long run? How much of this decision stems from their Epic Games sponsorship, or is it pointing at a trend that the rest of the industry will follow? I think one thing I want to point out is that there have been some egregious blows dealt to the physical games medium, specifically, it has to be said, on the Xbox side, because smart delivery wasn't great for Xbox Series. There were specific games, but it was a problem. There's also the 50 gigabyte disk issue, which I think can be overcome because obviously the machine can play 4K Blu-rays, right? So it should be doable. Right?
Exactly.
But I do think it's worth pointing out that the physical market is still in remarkably robust shape. Yes, things are shifting towards digital, but they can't leave the physical market behind for a number of reasons. Principally because, let's say you're a parent with a child, you can't really leave your credit card sitting on your digital account. So there is a certain degree of sort of control there by having, physical copies. Secondly, I don't think a lot of people are sort of showcasing or highlighting the concept of ownership and resale anymore.
Right.
But it is still there. It is still an important thing. It's a key part of ownership of a game, especially when your games are like $70, £60, £70. This is a lot of money, and you might wish to recoup some of that.
Not to mention sales.
Yeah.
Or even,
absolutely.
Not that they would love this.
Competition.
Yeah, it's competition.
Or please, for competition.
Day one pricing, for instance, on all these games costing 70, 80 euro over here, especially, and $70 in the US. If you look on Amazon, you go to certain retailers, like I picked up Tears of the Kingdom for coverage, right? And the actual online price for it was 70 euro. But I was able to go to a local shop and they had it for 59, right? And that's kind of what I'm used to at this point, and that the physical copies are usually actually more affordable and more likely to go on sale. If you eliminate that competition entirely, and unlike the PC where yes, Steam is popular, but it's an open marketplace, that's not the case in these consoles. And don't tell me that these companies are going to be like, oh well, if we're all digital now, we can scale that price back down. No, that's not going to happen. They want all the money, and they're going to charge as much as they can for it. And if they have complete control over that marketplace, well, I don't think prices are going to be coming down. I mean, the biggest thing I see is like, if you look back at say like PS4, Xbox One stuff, you go to like any sort of like secondhand game shop, right? You find like just about every PS4, Xbox One game you could want for like $5, $10. All the big heavy hitters, they're dirt cheap. You can get them so easily. You go onto the online store equivalent for those console manufacturers, and they're usually still like $30, $40. Sometimes they just sit at 20 for years. Like these things don't depreciate in value on the digital storefront. They just kind of stay at this price. Occasionally they show up in a sale, but it's usually just like this fixed price. And you're like, really? But you can get a physical copy for a fraction of that. And I think that's still important for people and something to consider.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up the software side of the Sony showcase, I can see that somebody, and I suspect it's you, John, has added, we forgot Dragon's Dogma 2. That was huge.
It was huge.
And we forgot about it. Yeah, but
it wasn't on the initial list posted for some reason.
It wasn't on the initial list, but it does look incredible, right?
That was probably one of the best surprises and best showpieces during the entire showcase, where, Dragon's Dogma was this really interesting technical action RPG that Capcom produced in the late PS3 360 era, right? And people have come to realize how smartly designed it was. It's flawed for sure, but it's a fantastic game, and it's one of those rare ones that I really got a lot out of at the time, especially just the depth of the combat and everything. I've always preferred Dragon's Dogma to what they did with Monster Hunter, to be honest. It's quite a different thing, but It felt like taking concepts from Monster Hunter and turning it into its own thing. And yeah, this trailer to me, which all shows real-time RE engine stuff, which is extremely evident by that weird reconstruction issue we noticed with Resident Evil 4, by the way, with lots of extra pixelation that's visible.
But that was fixed in Resident Evil 4.
It
right?
was, but it's here in it's here in this trailer. So, guys, please fix that before launch. But aside from that, I thought it looked lovely. It looked great, and it looked like we're seeing the actual game. And there's some cool physics stuff in here, like that scene where the bridge just like completely crumbles out from under them, and some of the other stuff going on. And it features these large creatures like the original, but I think with the much faster hardware, they can really take that stuff to the next level. So yeah, I'm very happy. And again, along with somebody like Insomniac, I feel like Capcom is just kicking butt right now, right? Like so many games, like Street Fighter 6, you got Dragon's Dogma. They've done, all these amazing Resident Evil games. They've done smaller games, big games, everything. And they're just firing on all cylinders and just hitting every note. Like Capcom is absolutely back and on fire, and they have been for years now. So hats off to those guys. And it's all being done with their in-house technology too. No Unreal Engine, which is awesome.
Absolutely. Oliver, did you play the original?
No, I didn't. I've heard good things, but no, it slipped me by. I was
curious about your reaction to this one then.
Oh, I mean, I thought it looked really interesting. The fact they're using RE Engine for this big kind of open fantasy RPG, I think that's an interesting choice. And I hope it works out.
It's the first time, right?
Yeah. I think it is the first time. The character models didn't look super great in a lot of scenes, but it does look very detailed. It does look, suitably above. I think they're certainly the prior game, but their last gen output as well. And it is a current gen exclusive with no specified release date. So hopefully it'll come out well and be a good sequel. But yeah, I have no experience with that prior title.
Right.
Fair enough.
Now, also with this aesthetic though, you probably know we didn't talk about Final Fantasy 16, and that had a nice trailer, but that's mainly because it comes out very soon. So I'll be covering that, and I'm very, very excited for it. But yeah, that's very close. Same with Street Fighter 6. One of us is going to cover it. Probably Tom. He's like especially the big fighting game guy, but that also got a trailer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good stuff. Well, that's all we've really got to say about the software side of the showcase. But with that said, we have been talking for about 55 minutes now. But now let's discuss the curious reveal of the curious reveal of the Project Q handheld. So the rumors are true. It was essentially going to be, and it is essentially going to be a handheld for remote play. I'm kind of baffled by this because, to be frank, remote play isn't very good. I tested it out a while ago when these rumors first emerged. It's going to need a bit of an overhaul to make it viable, in my opinion. The latency just isn't very good at all. The stream is like 1080p, 8 megabits per second. So the image quality isn't great. But I guess if you're willing to invest the R&D into producing a new handheld, possibly there will be upgrades on the software side as well. But Oliver, this was a crazy design to unveil, right? It was basically, an 8-inch screen surrounded by a DualSense controller that's been cleaved in two.
Yeah, like a very long DualSense with like a tablet in the middle. It really is just like you can just staple it together.
The GameCube controller that was released for PSO, Phantasy Star Online.
Oh yeah,
it had the keyboard in the middle.
Yeah,
wow. It was a GameCube controller split in half with a giant keyboard in the middle. That's what this looks like.
Yeah.
Oliver, what do you make of this one? I mean, I can pretty much predict what John would say about it, so I'll come to you first.
Yeah.
Does this excite you in any way?
I think I'll probably be a bit more positive towards the device than I expect John will. It's very interesting. The Insider Gaming leak from a couple weeks ago, I think, was absolutely spot on. Every single detail is basically replicated here, as far as I can tell, even down to like the Q code name. It is, to me, sort of a compelling device if they can sort out the remote play issues with image quality and also with potentially with latency as well. Just because I know a lot of people use their Nintendo Switches at home as kind of a companion in the bed or on the couch or something. in portable modes. So I could definitely see this serving the same role, albeit with, potentially much higher fidelity thanks to the hardware platform that it's connected to. I am concerned, though, about remote play because, like you said, it's not very good. I'm also a little bit curious about some aspects of it because there's no touchpad in the device. And when they spun it around, the back is totally featureless as well.
What about the touch screen?
They could emulate it through the touch screen, I suppose, but that's a little bit weird. It does look comfortable, at least, despite the weird design. I'm sure it will be comfortable in the hands. It basically is just an elongated PlayStation 5 controller. So, yeah, and outside of that, my only other thought is the 1080p IPS screen. The LCD that's not super enticing, but I think it could be a good device depending on how they handle the remote play implementation.
I mean, John, I will come to you now. The thing is, the Wii U actually did this rather well. The controller for off-screen play was, it was really good.
That was kind of my joke before we started recording, was like between the Project Q handheld and the announcement of Foam Stars, Sony basically were like, hey, here's the Wii U and our version of Splatoon. Well, it's Square Enix, but it's like Splatoon and the Wii U, hot stuff. I mean, first, the design for me, I look at this and this looks like something that like a sixth grader would make. We're like, dude, what if you put a screen on a PlayStation controller? You know what I mean? They just like drew it in their notebook and it's like, okay, well, it's just like, it's the most, to me, like compared to, I will say the elegance of Sony's dedicated handhelds, the Kutaragi era, especially the PSP, which was like a work of art. And the Vita as well is a beautifully designed machine. It still feels premium right now. Just an awesome piece of hardware. This isn't a dedicated platform, but this thing completely lacks all of that. It has none of that elegance. And based on the absolutely abhorrent battery life of the DualSense controller, I'm kind of guessing this probably isn't going to have great battery life either, which makes it even more confusing.
Well, there's more surface area for a bigger battery,
yeah,
which
but still,
it's got to have by definition to run an 8-inch 1080p.
Oh, for sure.
screen.
It's going to have a bigger battery, but will it be big enough to power it for more than like 2 hours?
You'd hope so.
You'd hope, but we'll see. I mean, we can't really comment on that because we don't know, but just this idea, though, I mean, does it tap into the cloud, or is it just a local remote device? Do we know?
It's a local remote device, but there has been talk that you need to be online to use it, similar to remote play, right? I think you need to be online to use remote play. I just think there's a lot of questions here, and it's all very well for Jim Ryan to say, yes, we're going to reveal more later. But if you're going to reveal a device, that leaves so many questions hanging in the air, absolutely you should be trying to anticipate and answer those questions.
I just
just show it being used.
What's the I just can't get, I don't understand the purpose. I mean, it is,
well, the purpose is fairly straightforward,
it's the
right?
Wii U.
Because
it's the Wii U.
It's the Wii U pad,
the Wii
but
U.
at the same time, I do think there is utility in being able to play without using your main screen, because if your PS5 is in the living room connected to the TV, somebody else might be wanting to watch something.
Rich, you saying that, I'm almost picturing you as Reggie on stage right now talking about the Wii U. That's exactly the kind of arguments they give, right? They're like, well, what if you want to play Batman Arkham City, like the whatever edition, the armored edition, and your spouse is watching TV? Well, now you can do it on the Wii U. That's basically what this is. It's just like, oh, if you want to go play in the other room.
If I was Reggie, what I'd be doing is actually wearing a jacket and then taking the device out of my jacket pocket.
Yeah, I don't think it would fit.
I will say this, though. If they could actually deliver what the Wii U did, that kind of like input latency, the image quality, like the fluidity of it, if it was actually that good, then I would say it's not for me, but it's not a bad device that could actually be compelling for some people. I'm extremely skeptical that it's actually going to be as good as the Wii U gamepad.
Well, you'd hope that 11 years on that they would have something that at least gets
hope,
close.
but you've seen what the remote play stuff looks like. It's really bad. Like, it's not even close to the Wii U.
Do you remember for the Switch they did that lifestyle trailer to introduce the device, right? And I'm just trying to imagine the lifestyle equivalent to this, and maybe the first opening shot would be slowly panning up to see a man sitting on the toilet playing PlayStation 5.
I was thinking more, just a dude sitting on his couch playing Call of Duty, and then somebody walks in like, I want to watch, I don't know, like a cooking show. And then he goes and takes it to the bathroom and continues from there.
Well, I'll tell you what, the face-off is obvious, right? It is going to be Project Q versus the Wii U gamepad, which has got the lowest latency.
That actually makes me want to cover it now. I want to do a Wii U versus Q.
Let's just take a quick supporter question here from Eric Hurst, who is not particularly enamored with the concept either. Is Project Q simply dead on arrival? I can't help but think that dedicated proprietary streaming boxes are all but redundant. I don't own a streaming box just for Disney Plus. I don't own an MP3 player just for Spotify. Why on earth would I buy a streaming device just for playing games on my PS5? If I truly wanted a streaming solution for my PS5, I'd purchase one of those clips to connect my phone to my DualSense and stream games to the Remote Play app. Why would I spend potentially hundreds on a dedicated device for an experience that will likely be as unreliable as any other gaming stream service? Good points, and I think this is the thing, right? Show the device working, show why it has, why you made it, why it exists, and that's what we didn't get there. And I think just generally, the end of E3 and the transition to these gaming events is basically killed nuance, right? It's killed the ability for journalists to turn up at these events and actually ask questions, go hands-on, get an idea of what's actually going on with these games. And in terms of new hardware, hands-on impressions, right? That's key to it. But that's the sad thing, I think, about one of the sort of consequences of the pandemic era is it's kind of said to developers and publishers, actually, you don't really need to turn up to live shows anymore, and you actually have more control over your message. And I think that's really, really sad.
But I don't think it benefits them necessarily, because there is so many unanswered questions that can result in controversy. I mean, like you say, when you would go to an event and you're presented with these demos, there'd be people working on the project just nearby, right? You could ask them questions just like as a normal conversation, not even part of like a media event thing. Just like, it's like, hey, here's a question for you. And they would often answer it. And, you get conversation about this stuff. It gives you this extra context about what they're trying to do. And it immediately dissipates some of the confusion around announcements. And you definitely feel like that could have been useful here. There just wasn't much of a vision for this device. It just feels like I don't know. It's the ultimate. Yeah, I should probably stop.
No, I get what you're saying, John, because one of the basics of a product reveal is to say, make a pitch. Why does this thing exist? Why do you need this device? You don't just turn up with a device, show a picture of it and say, this is coming soon. Like,
I mean, that's okay. Why, not that this is as big a device, but that's specifically where someone like Steve Jobs really succeeded. That was his crowning achievement, was being able to come up with reasons why people would want to own this device. And he presented it in such a compelling way that even if it was a useless thing, and it usually wasn't, people would still be like, oh my God, I need this right now. Mm-hmm. And this was just like, here's this thing. It looks kind of dumb, and there's no point for it.
But going back to the showcase in general, it is the case that we saw a lot of great games, but again, we had no real idea of the vision behind them. We just saw a bunch of random imagery. Then we moved on to another game with random imagery. This is the classic Microsoft playbook, which we've railed against, which they have responded to.
They have
with developer_direct. Which is just brilliant.
I think to kind of answer that question, why would you buy a streaming device for games specifically from your PS5? It would be because you have a really good experience on that device. So I think it would totally be contingent on Sony delivering new technology for streaming. I think that needs to be the baseline. But if that's not there, then I don't think it will be a device that anyone really wants.
And, if that's the case, why not tell us that?
Right, yeah, totally.
I also wonder what the hacking potential is for this thing. Like, what's actually in this device? Like, what is it, and what can be done with it? Because like the PS TV, right? That Vita TV, that thing wasn't that useful out of the gate officially, but after the homebrew scene got their hands on it, it's now like an awesome piece of kit.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
It's maybe the same thing could happen here.
Wasn't that revealed from an exec's jacket pocket?
Probably. It feels like it would have been. God, I miss that era of suits though. The mid 2000s E3, man. Nobody could do it like Kutaragi. That man would come out and just like the room was on fire. Man.
Jensen's classic safari suit from the PS3.
Oh, the safari suit. Oh.
I think that's all we've really got to say about the Sony showcase. But, to be fair, we have been talking about it for over an hour. But let's move on now to supporter Q&A. This is the part of the show where every week we ask our supporters to provide a bunch of questions to add into the show. And we pick the best or the ones that we're most equipped to answer. And here they are. But before I go on, one of our Discord community members, Alan, wants to make it clear that we do actually answer a big bunch of questions all the time, every day in our Ask Us Anything channel. And he is entirely right to point that out because we do. But let's move on to this first question. Actually, I'm going to group the first two together. This one first from Youth in Asia. With Nvidia's stock price skyrocketing as a result of recent growth in their server/AI segment, is there any concern about GPU makers shifting focus away from gaming? Could we see another GPU shortage as silicon that may have once been used for gaming cards gets diverted to server? Or could we see less innovation as GPU manufacturers shift talent and resources to more profitable segments? And this question from Garten Reiser. How do you see the midterm or long-term future of Nvidia now that enterprise business is making them more than twice the money as the gaming business? So there's a lot of concern here, and obviously this comes in the wake of the RTX 4060 Ti launch this week, which I think has been a failure on many levels, and I still haven't got around to doing, as I speak, I still haven't got around to doing the video review for that. And, it's kind of bizarre to want to do a video review when you're going to launch it into one of the most toxic atmospheres I've seen. It's not a great product at all. I'm going to quickly answer this question. I'm not sure what you guys think, but basically it is profoundly unsound business practice to have all of your eggs in one basket. And these things are cyclical, right? So, there was a mining boom that disappeared. Currently, there's an AI boom. And who knows where that's going to lead. But it's not always going to be a defining element of the business. Gaming is always going to be a key part of Nvidia's offering, right? And, when you own effectively 80% market share, you don't turn your back on that. So I don't think it's going to have too much of an effect on the business. And secondly, this idea of shifting allocation, from the silicon wafers away from gaming and towards enterprise. There's just two different levels of volume we're dealing with here. The enterprise segment is high yield, low volume, and gaming is a much higher volume but much lower yield than enterprise. It's just a good business mix. So I'm not too concerned, but I am concerned about obviously what's I think we predicted when 40 series emerged that there were going to be profound problems once we get to the lower end of the stack where users demand the most volume, the most value, and that has come to pass. Any reaction to that, John?
Like you say, this specifically for this question, the business is very cyclical, and I don't think Nvidia is going to throw all their eggs in one basket. That would just be foolish. But I do think there's definitely a problem right now in the GPU industry in general, and AMD is also guilty of this, I'd say, where these low-end products just aren't hitting the level of quality that you'd expect given the price that they're asking. You know what I mean? And it's becoming hard to even justify their existence at this point. It's just, these aren't great cards now. And I feel like this is between this and then all of the issues with with the software launching on PC as of late, it kind of feels like PC gaming is going through another tough period right now. Like, obviously smaller titles, they're fine. Steam is alive and well and all that, but it just feels like big releases are coming out with problems. The GPU market isn't where it should be. It feels like something needs to change. We had hoped that Intel with their Arc series would come out and sort of like shuffle things up a little bit. But unfortunately, while those products are interesting and they're pretty nice cards, they're not competing for the same markets necessarily. Although I guess you could argue that the Arc is kind of playing in the same pool as like a 4060 Ti, though the Arc 770 is still not 4060 Ti level in terms of performance, so it's not, but still. So yeah, I don't know. We're kind of in a weird spot right now, I think.
Yeah, I could definitely see Nvidia shifting focus, because if you look at their trajectory over the past few years of earnings, like when they report their server hardware, gaming hardware mix, like every quarter it's up and up and up and up on the server revenue, to the point where like their data center revenue is like 70% of their revenue at this point. That like it's very intense. That's a very high profit sector, because you have these like H100 GPUs that sell for $20,000 per GPU. And I don't think AI as a market segment is going away anytime soon. So I suspect they could divert, but I also think that the GPU gaming market will always be a part of their portfolio, even if they were to move some engineering resources over. I don't think they would ever abandon it.
Oliver, raising those points, that does make me consider the fact that when they release a product like the 4060 Ti to negative reaction, that it's not actually that big of a deal for them, right? They can afford to do this, and that's kind of a shame. But like,
there's general stagnation at the lower end of the stack, and there's also the RX 7600 that released this week. Again, I'm behind on that one, but I've looked at the reviews, and again, you're not seeing any kind of improved value proposition against the cards that already exist.
I think for the budget-minded consumer, Rich, I would say that the best option is still to seek out a prior generation card of a higher class with more VRAM. On the used market, you can usually get those cheaper, and I think it's probably better in the long term.
The thing is, the thing that's really hits Nvidia over the head is that 3060 with 12 gigs of RAM, right?
Gosh darn thing.
There was a conscious decision back in 2020, 2021, where, they could have launched that product owing to its 192-bit memory bus with either 6 gigabytes of RAM or 12 gigabytes of RAM. For whatever reason, they chose to go with 12 gigabytes, and it's going to give that card legs, right? And what's happening now is that we're emerging from the cross-gen period. Target platform for a lot of these new AAA titles is going to be PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, right? Because they're let's be honest, they're effectively delivering similar hardware capabilities. So the concept that your $400 GPU isn't going to be able to deliver like the texture quality in those games because you're limited by the VRAM buffer, that is highly problematic. And I just don't understand why that product launched at that price point with 8 gigs when they've already got, when previously they determined that the calculus was 6 gigs isn't good enough for a 60 class product, we've got to bump it up to 12. It's kind of like a reverse of that situation in a period where extra VRAM is becoming more important. And the other thing, of course, is, if your generational boosts are as limited as the 4060 Ti's, how do you increase value? And the obvious solution is, well, if there's a problem with VRAM, we'll give you extra memory. Obviously, it introduces some level of incongruity when your 70 class product only has 12 gigs of RAM, but hey, it was the same with the last generation. But yeah, really desperate times for the kind of mainstream segment at the moment. And the other thing, of course, is that now that the 4060 Ti is a known measure, it kind of just makes things highly pessimistic when it comes to looking at the base 4060. Anyway, look, let's move on to the next question. This one from Dajarko. It's a long question, but it's really interesting stuff. Hi DF, I've been thinking about your discussion of the need to find a better way of representing the temporal stability of frame delivery. Frame rate is one measure and frame timing is another, but really what actually matters is a measure of human perception. This is something that in most fields is tackled using demographic data, for instance, the development of the Harman curve for the ideal target audio output of earphones. There's going to be significant variance in individual perception of frame timing consistency, and I think it's about ruddy time that someone did some real research into what most people find perceptible or not. You'd likely arrive at a curve for each established frame rate target, i.e. the Ledbetter 40 FPS curve tells us that for 95% of players, these frame time inconsistencies will be imperceptible. You essentially need frame time human perception curve data for each frame rate target so that you can compare output to known demographic metrics. Your other major variable is the demographic, because obviously things like age and genetic variance in nerve conductance velocity will affect perception. It would be sensible for the people being tested to all be quote unquote average gamers, i.e. 100 to 1000 average gamers. Perhaps you could design a test and unleash it at a big gaming event. If anyone held those these days, think big, ! This is brilliant stuff, right? Because, there is a rule of diminishing returns in terms of how much processing resource you put towards achieving a certain frame rate target, right? And if you're at 120 frames per second, how many people can tell the difference versus 90 frames per second versus 60 frames per second? And so actually producing a test that, figures out the sweet spot for frame rates or frame time and, variations off that frame time, I think this is potentially a way forward. Oliver, what do you make of this?
Well, I mean, I think a simple way, kind of casting the demographic side stuff aside for a moment, would be to say, we have our target frame time or our average frame time, and then anything that's like twice that or some margin above that would be marked, something like that might work. But then again, at higher frame rates, like if we're talking about a game going from 16.66 milliseconds to 30 milliseconds, that's very noticeable in terms of a frame time spike, even on a VRR display. But if you're talking about going from like 120 and dropping one frame down from 8.33 to 16.66 or whatever, that's a lot less noticeable. So there would have to be I think you'd have to have some kind of algorithmic approach that would be not just a simple rule. Do you know what I'm saying? That's sort of what comes to mind.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. John?
So this actually got me thinking about something else, an experiment that I've kind of performed multiple times whenever I've had visitors, including developers that have come to this space here in my office. I wanted to gauge perception of different display types, and I am set up in such a way that I can have an OLED next to an LCD, next to a plasma, next to a CRT, and send the same content to all of them, like a 60 frames per second scrolling playfield moving at a consistent rate. And, and every time, it's always interesting to see as they look closer and start thinking about it, the way they perceive it, their first perception, like what they describe back to me. And it's given me some insight into these things that has been fascinating. And most people do end up, like when they first look at, I say, start on this LCD here and look at this playfield. They say, okay, that looks fine, and then you move them around. And once they've looked at like the CRT or the plasma or something, and then you look back at the LCD and then you look back at the other one, all of a sudden they notice that when they would not have been able to tell you one way or another that there was a difference, right? Like just an LCD in isolation, they see nothing. They perceive it as fine. But then you show them this other thing and suddenly they look back and they're like, oh, that looks a lot worse, right? And so this kind of ties into the perception of frame rate, where you'll have people that, they'll think, oh, this frame rate is fine, right? And then you show them something else, and then, they go back to the original after seeing something smoother, and that perception changes. That's why I actually think mid-game frame rate caps have a weird effect on people. If you switch to, say, a quality mode in game, you were just playing at 60, you switch to quality mode, now you're at 30. 30 initially looks horrible to the eyes. It's almost like difficult to even look at. But if you just started there, or you were to walk away and come back, I think the perception is different, right? So all these things kind of influence the way the brain and people see things and perceive things. And that even extends to other aspects. Like I'm testing this big OLED monitor right now for review. It's a flat 48-inch screen. It's in front of me. For the first couple days, it looked completely convex. So I've been using a curved monitor, and I was like, what is going on? It looks like the screen is actually bowing outward. My TV doesn't do that, and it's flat. What's going on? I actually searched it up, and you see thousands of posts about this phenomenon where people would switch from curved back to flat, and that's all they could see is the screen going convex. And it's the brain almost like interpreting the image. And it's specifically, it's even like the workspace. If I set this monitor in my workspace where my brain's used to seeing the curved monitor, it looks convex. If I view the same screen like in a different location, it looks fine. And it's just, it really made me think about the way the brain perceives things like frames and imagery and all these different aspects, and how complicated this is, how variable it can be. And it's just whether people are even aware of these things and how that influences their thoughts on the matter. So it's such a complicated thing to get into that I like this idea of actually testing a bunch of people under various circumstances and seeing what you get out of it, right?
Yeah. My only concern about stuff like this is that in my experience, the average gamer, the average person that I speak to about video games doesn't tend to notice, even if I tried to show them in side by side. Sometimes people just don't have an affinity for, spotting the unlocked frame rate or spotting a game at 30 FPS or 60 FPS or certainly 120 FPS versus 60. Whereas I tend to have a very good eye for like, oh yeah, that dropped a frame, not, I tend to have a very good eye for it. And I tend to be very sensitive to those things. And I wonder if we had a test that was based on some average, if that would be unsatisfying to us, because we would spot problems more readily than our test says we should, right? So,
well, the whole point of the analysis is to point out technical issues, right? Mm-hmm. And you should be looking for the cases that we would actually be noticing, because it would be pointing towards some underlying issue that with the game that kind of needs addressing. And I think what we've seen recently, certainly with stuff like Jedi Survivor on consoles and the whole tearing thing there, which we discussed last week, is that people do notice things that are awry. And I honestly think it does come down to consistency. You don't need to have the highest possible frame rate, but what you do need is to have good consistency in what you are delivering. But this data would certainly be interesting to me. But I think it is simply the case that, Alex was sent a tweet where it was, basically our existing frame time graph with color bands where, if the spikes entered the yellow, it's like slightly problematic. If it's entering the red, it's like a big problem. Yeah. That would be an interesting way of doing things, but be interested to see how people perceive that.
All right, Real Rich, before we move on, I need to inject a little bit of levity here. If you pop open Slack, take a look at this. And this relates to a game that Tom is currently covering, the Gollum game. And it's suddenly somebody realized, and I completely missed this, that his character model, it's Crazy Frog. It's just, he looks like Crazy Frog.
Well, he's got big eyes and a bulbous head, if that's what you mean. Yeah,
it feels like an old shriveled version of the Crazy Frog.
I think the thing to bear in mind, though, is that Gollum was held in captivity in Mordor and tortured for 8 years. So I'm not quite sure that the Crazy Frog's smiling demeanor there is a good fit for Gollum.
It's like before and after, I guess.
Wow.
Oh my goodness. All right, continue.
Wow, that kind of threw me there. Just post-former seeing Crazy Frog. Let's move on to the next question from Struggling Shader. Hi guys! Exclamation point. I'm seeing all reviews complaining about 4060 Ti lack of performance, but how impressive is it with DLSS 3 frame generation enabled? According to Nvidia, it would be in the ballpark of 3090 experience for high refresh rates. I know it's a very specific scenario, low VRAM requirement, DLSS 3 support, but everybody is so focused on the bad value of the product that its most interesting features are not being discussed. So, on the one hand, I agree with you in that there are interesting features of the 4060 Ti that aren't being discussed. And I'll send some footage here to Oliver from my review, which I haven't finished yet. But essentially, if you take the 4060 Ti and put it in a mid-range PC, DLSS 3 does have a really interesting and very useful use case scenario, which is that your mainstream PC typically comes with a mainstream CPU, right? And if you play games on max settings or close to max settings, the CPU can't keep up, but your GPU can keep up. So what DLSS 3 frame gen does in that scenario is turn games that are running from 40, 50 frames per second, and it takes them up into your VRR window. And I consider that to be actually a really valuable addition to a mainstream gaming setup, where if your CPU isn't capable of getting 60 or higher in these titles, frame gen basically gets you there. I think that's actually a really valuable part because, if you're testing DLSS 3 on a 13900K, for example, you're not going to be seeing that effect. And yeah, that was an interesting thing for me. But the concept that you're getting a ballpark 3090 experience, just don't go there. That's nuts for a number of reasons. First of all, this isn't a 4K card, and the narrow memory interface of a 4K it really impacts 4K. Secondly, as Struggling Shader points out in the question, 4K requires a lot of VRAM, which the 4060 Ti doesn't have. So there are scenarios like Forza Horizon 4, for example, where the added VRAM footprint of an extra frame held in memory actually causes a regression in performance for enabling DLSS 3, which is not in the script, right? And I suspect that once the 16 gig model comes along and we test it, that problem will go away. I don't think it's helpful to compare a 4060 Ti to a 4090 for a whole bunch of scenarios. I mean, it's got 24 gigs of VRAM. For starters.
Yeah.
But DLSS 3 does have value, and yes, the efficiency of the 4060 Ti is really impressive. And you can play, Cyberpunk RT Overdrive on a $400 GPU above 60 frames per second at 1440p DLSS balance. This is really good stuff, but I still can't recommend the product. Sorry. Let's move on. Final question. This one from Agonizing Rectal Pain. They're back. Hi DF. Question for John. Now that you've entered the world of consumer CRTs, could we possibly see a video on using modern technology with them? PC emulators at true 240p, scan lines and all. Path traced games at a nice soft 480i. Details on whatever adapters you're using. Also, for future reference, I am a she. Laughing my ass off. Keep meaning to correct you guys, but kept forgetting.
Okay. That's a great name still. My favorite.
Yeah.
Except for Adabada Pling Boink Wee. That's also a good one.
So come on, John.
The question
have at it.
Oh man, this is a tough one. So for computer stuff, PC stuff, I do still kind of recommend like a PC monitor, like an old school VGA monitor. But if you really want to get into this 15 kilohertz world, 240p is pretty tricky actually. So emulation, first of all, you can do 240p using certain devices. For instance, I have an Extron Emosha, one of the Emosha devices, where you can basically pipe a video signal in through BNC connectors, and it actually has a hardware switch that basically turns that signal into 240p. And with games like, say, Sonic Mania or like some pixel art games that just run at 60 hertz, it's perfect. It looks awesome. The problem with emulation, though, especially like MAME, is that a lot of those use weird refresh rates and output in a very specific, strange resolution that isn't very well suited to these types of devices. There's some older graphics cards that do support this stuff, but I found like getting MAME to work correctly at the right resolution is extremely annoying. It's so fiddly and difficult, and it requires some very specific hardware as well. I don't really recommend that. That's why I like the Mister for that. But for 480i or 240p PC gaming, it is pretty darn cool that you can do it if you want. And it does give it a very different look, I would say. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this for like super high-res games, hence the VGA monitor recommendation, but it can be interesting, especially for lo-fi stuff, like playing, you know, like the latest boomer shooter on there. Like I suspect Warhammer 40k Bolt Gun would be pretty awesome on a CRT like this at 240p. I need to try that actually. I would be into that. So, but yeah, as far as like the devices used, I don't remember all the options off the top of my head, but Extron Emosha is definitely the one I use for that, which I quite like, but I don't think they're very obtainable or cheap. And it's probably not worth spending a bunch on a device like that for most people. But I think there are cheaper solutions now. So, yeah.
Oliver, do you have any interest at all in this CRT mania?
No, no, I don't. Well, no, I do have an interest in it.
Oh,
I do have an interest in it. I just don't have any good CRTs. Actually, I had a Toshiba CRT many years ago that had a 1080i support. It was a flat panel CRT that was really good, but I think we got rid of it some years ago, so sort of a shame. But yeah, I have no.
You'll find yourself a good Trinitron monitor and behold.
Yeah, I just have like a big laggy LCD, so no.
Yeah, seriously, Oliver. Like I seriously do recommend that at least you take a look at it, because I feel like, as was the case with Alex, which prompted him to buy a CRT and keep it on his desk as well. Like once you actually see this in motion again, you'll be like, "What have I been missing?"
You know, some of my friends do have CRT setups, and I've been over, and it looks terrific. Like the motion clarity looks awesome.
The motion clarity is so good. Like I think 60 frames per second looks so good on one of those, but on like a normal LCD, I feel like 60 doesn't actually look that good. It looks more like 30 on a CRT in terms of the way I perceive it. It just sucks, man. I hate LCDs.
Yeah, I just have limited space, unfortunately, at the moment. But
that is unfortunately the big flaw with CRTs. They are gigantic and heavy.
Absolutely. So, John, RT Overdrive at a nice soft 480i. Tempted?
I might try it for fun, but RT Overdrive on the FW900 though is far more compelling, and I think would actually blow people's minds if they saw it. Just it's really, really good looking.
I mean, we can do a video on it, but ultimately they'll be watching it on an LCD.
Yeah, but then again, if you look at, people are still interested. Maybe I should fire up the old FW900 again and revisit some stuff on there, and maybe with some other CRTs as well for good measure.
Okay, fair enough.
We'll see.
Well, that's it. That's the final question of this section, and therefore the end of the show. So if you enjoyed it, please do like, subscribe, share, ring the bell for those notifications. No notifications at all this week, which is fascinating. And DF supporter program. Join us. Join our amazing community. Ask questions in the Ask Us Any Questions area, just as Alan pointed out. Lots of bonus material, early access, and retro goodies. So yes, that's it for this show, and we'll see you next week. But in the meantime, thanks for watching and indeed supporting Digital Foundry.